This story gently plunges you into the completely unhinged, wildly inconsistent, and gloriously absurd world of Greek mythology. Forget noble heroes and wise gods. This is a universe where Zeus turns into a swan to flirt, Narcissus falls in love with himself and dies, and Kronos casually eats his children like grapes. The black humor flows freely as we explore stories of divine pettiness, illogical quests, and gods who solve problems by making them 200% worse. Need a war to end? Sacrifice your daughter. Want to impress someone? Launch a plague. Every tale seems designed by a committee of bored theater kids with wine. From divine temper tantrums to moral lessons that age like warm goat milk, this story will walk you through the chaos with a calm voice and sarcastic affection. By the end, you'll be asleep or wondering why no one's adapted these myths as dark comedies. Oh, wait, they have. It's called Western civilization, Mount Olympus. The name conjures images of sun drenched peaks, ethereal beauty, and divine serenity, doesn't it? Forget that romanticized drivel. Picture instead a dilapidated mansion perched precariously on a cliff face, constantly threatened by landslides and the occasional rogue thunderbolt. This is the reality of the Olympian household, a place where the divine family drama is so spectacularly dysfunctional it would make the Kardashians look like a choir of angels. Let's start with the power couple, if you can even call it that. Zeus and Hera. Their marriage, a tempestuous whirlwind of infidelity, jealousy, and petty revenge, is the stuff of legendary infamy. It wasn't that idyllic union of a king and queen. It was more like a prolonged, thunderous cage match, with the collateral damage being countless mortals and a perpetually stressed out staff of divine servants. Imagine the morning routine alone. Zeus, the king of the gods, wakes up after a particularly boisterous night, or perhaps a series of them, surrounded by the remnants of his latest conquest. Hera, queen of the gods and a woman known for her explosive temper, is already fuming. Her eyes, blazing with righteous indignation, scour the palace for evidence of the king's nocturnal activities. This is before breakfast. The breakfast itself is likely a tense affair, punctuated by pointed glares and subtle and not so subtle attempts at poisoning. Their arguments are legendary, echoing across the mortal world as thunder and lightning. They weren't simply disagreements, they were epic, earth shattering rows that could cause earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. One could almost set one's watch by the frequency of their explosive exchanges. The sheer volume of their verbal attacks could rival a rock concert, leaving the other Olympian gods clutching their ears and praying for divine soundproofing. And let's not forget the constant power plays. Zeus, with his omnipotence and penchant for seduction, constantly pushes boundaries. Hera, in turn, retaliates with characteristic fury, unleashing her wrath on Zeus's hapless offspring, and occasionally on Zeus himself, which is, let's be honest, extremely satisfying to witness. Their relationship is a constant battle for supremacy, a never-ending cycle of betrayal and retribution that leaves Mount Olympus in a state of perpetual chaos. The other gods aren't much better. Poseidon, the god of the sea, spends his days causing tsunamis and generally behaving like a surly teenager with a trident. Hades, the god of the underworld, is perpetually grumpy and only occasionally willing to participate in family gatherings, mostly to complain about the lack of decent ventilation in his subterranean realm. Ares, the god of war, is essentially a walking, talking, bloodthirsty disaster waiting to happen. He's constantly starting fights, and his only social skill is being able to instigate conflict between anyone and everyone. The goddesses fare little better. Athena, while intellectually superior, has a rigid, controlling personality that borders on the tyrannical. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, is obsessed with her appearance and engages in constant beauty contests, often causing mayhem in her pursuit of validation. Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, is fiercely independent and intensely protective of her wilderness, sometimes going to extreme measures to protect her beloved forests. Hephaestus, the god of the forge, is the only one who seems relatively sane, but even his peaceful crafting is constantly disrupted by the bickering and the general pandemonium. He spends most of his time repairing the damage caused by his more temperamental family members. Imagine him perpetually covered in soot and frustration, trying to fix a crack in the ceiling caused by another Zeus Hera blowout. The Olympian household is also plagued by a lack of domestic harmony. The palace is in a state of constant disrepair. Imagine Mount Olympus as a sitcom setting, a perpetually cluttered environment with broken furniture, overflowing ashtrays, or rather lightning bolt trays, and an air of general neglect. The divine cleaners likely earn overtime. It's a place where the only thing more abundant than divine power is utter domestic chaos. The gods' interactions extend beyond their immediate family. Their meddling in mortal affairs often compounds the chaos. They frequently intervene in human events, not to help, but to further their own amusement or to settle petty grudges. Imagine a celestial being casually deciding to unleash a plague on a city because its ruler offended them, or another god initiating a devastating war simply because they're bored. The overall atmosphere is one of constant turmoil, punctuated by the occasional divine intervention, which is usually for the worse. It's a world where the line between comedy and tragedy is incredibly blurred, a place where even the gods are subject to the whims of fate, their supposed omnipotence constantly challenged by their own flawed nature and ridiculous behavior. Their lives are far from the idyllic, serene existence often depicted in art and literature. Mount Olympus is not a paradise. It's a chaotic, dysfunctional family home where the daily drama is so outrageous it would make reality TV look tame. And that's before we even get to the pets. Let's just say, if Cerberus escaped, all bets are off. Think of it as a cosmic sitcom, only instead of a laugh track, you have the rumbling of thunder and the clash of cymbals. Instead of witty banter, you have petulant gods throwing thunderbolts at each other. And instead of a happy ending, you get a prophecy and a whole lot of existential dread. This, then, is the true face of Mount Olympus, a testament to the often hilarious and utterly absurd realities of divine dysfunction. Forget the heroic tales. The real story is one of epic family drama, inner god feuding, and a whole lot of divine incompetence. It's a narrative that's simultaneously terrifying and hilariously relatable. After all, haven't we all had at least one roommate who was a bit like Zeus? The story of Kronos, the titan who swallowed his children, is typically presented as a grim tragedy, a tale of parental tyranny, and a prophecy fulfilled. But let's be honest, viewed through the lens of a seasoned observer of divine dysfunction, it's a masterpiece of comedic incompetence. We're not talking about a carefully orchestrated plan of evil. We're talking about a spectacularly ill conceived strategy executed with the grace of a hippopotamus attempting ballet. Imagine the scene: Kronos, king of the Titans, a figure of immense power, but with the emotional intelligence of a particularly dense garden gnome. His wife, Rhea, bless her heart, is pregnant again and again. Each child, a nascent god or goddess, represents a potential threat to his reign, according to the prophecy. So, what's his solution? To swallow them whole? Think about that for a moment. The sheer audacity, the breathtaking lack of foresight. It's not subtle, folks. It's not even remotely clever. It's the equivalent of solving a global pandemic by stuffing everyone into a giant sock. First, let's consider the logistics. We're talking about deities here, not mere mortals. These aren't tiny newborns. They're powerful beings, growing rapidly, imbued with the potential for immense power. Just picture the sheer physical effort involved. Kronos, presumably, wasn't exactly a slender fellow. Imagine the strain on his digestive system. It must have been akin to a heavyweight champion attempting to consume a fully grown rhinoceros. And not just once, but multiple times. We're talking about a series of increasingly challenging meals, each one more monstrous and absurd than the last. One can only imagine the indigestion. The sheer discomfort must have been legendary. Picture Kronos, the all-powerful Titan king, doubled over in agony, clutching his stomach, belching forth the echoes of divine thunder. He probably needed a team of divine gastroenterologists on retainer. Imagine the bill. I'd wager it depleted more than a few of his coffers, especially considering the cost of after-dinner mints that could soothe the fiery wrath of a swallowed god. Then there's the matter of the burping. Now, I'm no expert on the digestive systems of ancient titans, but I have to imagine that regurgitating a fully formed god couldn't have been a simple affair. It's not like spitting out a cherry pit. These are beings of immense power, imbued with divine essence. Imagine the sheer force required to expel Poseidon, god of the sea, fully armed with his trident, with a force that could potentially create a tsunami in his father's gullet. The sheer chaos, the sheer mess. Moreover, consider the psychological trauma for the children involved. First, they're born into a world where their father is both their creator and quite literally their first predator. They are, for an indefinite period, swallowed whole only to be spat out later, essentially emerging from a horrific internal exile. What lasting effects does such an experience have on a young god's development? This would have created some seriously deep-seated daddy issues among the Olympian family. Surely, even for gods, the effects of such a bizarre childhood could not be easily dismissed. The long-term psychological impact? Let's just say group therapy sessions on Mount Olympus must have been lively affairs. And what about the dietary requirements? Were there special dietary needs to consider? Did Hades, the god of the underworld, require a particularly dark and brooding marinade before consumption? Did Hera demand a particular spice blend to enhance her already formidable temperament after her emergence? The menu planning must have been a nightmare. It's easy to see how Kronos, faced with such culinary challenges, might have opted for the simple, albeit macabre, solution of swallowing his children whole. And let's not forget the storage. Where did Kronos keep these divine snacks? In a divinely crafted refrigerator? Or did he have a series of rumbling internal chambers where they were kept in a state of suspended animation? What were the safety protocols? Imagine the potential for a massive foodborne illness in the divine family. A salmonella outbreak among the Olympians. The very thought sends shivers down my spine. Furthermore, consider the social ramifications. Imagine the family gatherings. Oh, hello, Hades, my dear son. Fancy seeing you again after that extended stay in Dad's stomach. Past the ambrosia, the awkward silences must have been deafening. The family therapy sessions, enough to make a therapist reconsider their career choice. And ultimately, Kronos' plan failed spectacularly. Rhea managed to trick him, substituting a stone for baby Zeus. The prophecy remained unfulfilled, leaving Kronos with a monumental stomach ache and a whole lot of unresolved daddy issues. It's a story of epic proportions, not for its tragic grandeur, but for its sheer, unadulterated absurdity. The tale of Kronos devouring his children is not just a mythical narrative, it's a cautionary tale of exceptionally poor parenting. It's a reminder that even gods are capable of making monumental mistakes, and that sometimes the most catastrophic events are born not of malice, but of incredible, almost laughable incompetence. So, next time you hear the story of Kronos, remember not to weep, but to chuckle at the spectacular ineptitude of a titan who thought that swallowing his children whole was a viable parenting strategy. It's a lesson in divine dysfunction that we can all appreciate and perhaps learn from. Maybe, unless, of course, you have a penchant for eating your offspring. If that's the case, seek professional help and perhaps consider a less digestive solution to your familial woes. Let's face it, the pantheon of Greek heroes is less a hall of fame and more a hall of, well, let's just say interesting choices. We're accustomed to tales of valiant warriors, cunning strategists, and unwavering champions of justice. But peel back the veneer of heroism, and what do we find? A surprisingly chaotic mess of impulsive decisions, questionable morals, and a remarkable lack of self awareness. These weren't paragons of virtue, they were, frankly, a bunch of flawed individuals who stumbled their way into legendary status. Their heroic journeys were less carefully orchestrated campaigns and more a series of accidental triumphs amidst a sea of self-inflicted calamities. Take Heracles, for instance, the epitome of strength and courage, right? Wrong. Heracles was essentially a walking, talking natural disaster, with a penchant for impulsive violence and a truly appalling temper. His 12 labors, often presented as feats of superhuman strength and unwavering dedication, were actually a rather haphazard collection of tasks born from his own impulsive actions and the equally impulsive decisions of those around him. Remember the Nemean lion? Heracles strangled the beast, yes, but only after a protracted battle that involved a surprising amount of luck and more than a few near-death experiences. The hero nearly became the hero's dinner. One doesn't typically picture a hero stumbling into success, repeatedly battered and bruised, but Heracles was less a master strategist and more a bull in a china shop wielding an unusually large club. And let's not forget his penchant for, shall we say, unconventional behavior. His infamous bouts of rage are legendary, resulting in the accidental deaths of several family members and numerous innocent bystanders. Heracles was the kind of guy who'd win a battle, but then accidentally burn down the city in the process. He wasn't just a hero, he was a walking catastrophe, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. His victories often felt less like well earned triumphs and more like the fortunate outcome of a series of near misses and colossal blunders. His legendary status, therefore, owes more to the sheer resilience of the people around him than any calculated mastery on his part. Then there's Odysseus, the cunning king of Ithaca. His 10-year journey home is often lauded as a testament to his resilience and intelligence, a tale of perseverance and ingenuity. But a closer examination reveals a less glamorous reality. Odysseus's journey was less a strategic masterclass and more a chaotic odyssey driven by an astonishing series of bad decisions, fueled by arrogance and a generous helping of hubris. The Cyclops incident? Let's be honest. Blinding a giant one-eyed monster was less a calculated move and more a rash reaction resulting from the aforementioned arrogance. His encounter with Circe? Well, let's just say his cunning resulted in him spending an extended period under the sway of a powerful sorceress. Hardly the actions of a strategic mastermind. And his interactions with the sirens? Let's be candid. Self-preservation was more a matter of luck than planning. Odysseus's journey was less a testament to his brilliance and more a testament to his inexplicable ability to survive a seemingly endless barrage of self-inflicted catastrophes. He was like a caffeinated cockroach, unbelievably resilient, but not necessarily intelligent. It's a wonder he made it home at all. It's enough to make one question the efficacy of ancient Greek navigational techniques. And what about the Trojan War, a decade-long conflict sparked by a stolen woman? The heroes, a collection of the mightiest warriors, were driven by vanity, ambition, and the most ridiculously thin pretext imaginable. Think about it. They launched a massive military campaign across the Aegean Sea, causing widespread destruction and bloodshed, all because of a beautiful woman. The strategic brilliance of the Trojan horse strategy is often discussed. But is that really brilliant strategy, or just sheer luck, exploiting a surprising lapse in judgment by the Trojans? The warriors involved, Achilles, Hector, Ajax, were all flawed, driven by personal ambitions and a breathtaking lack of empathy. Their heroism is often presented as a tale of courageous warfare, but the reality is far less glamorous. It was a bloody, senseless conflict, fueled by ego and a remarkably low tolerance for diplomacy. The victories were often Pyrrhic, leaving a trail of carnage and suffering in their wake. It was less a glorious epic and more a long, drawn-out brawl with a hefty body count. A glorious victory indeed, but one born more from attrition than any calculated strategy. In conclusion, the heroic figures of Greek mythology are less the flawless paragons of virtue that we've been led to believe, and more a collection of deeply flawed individuals whose successes were often as much about luck and the mistakes of their enemies as their own tactical prowess. Their heroism was less a result of strategic brilliance and more a consequence of their remarkable ability to stumble their way through life and somehow end up on top. It's a testament to their resilience, perhaps, but it's also a cautionary tale of how even the most flawed individuals can attain legendary status. Perhaps the true lesson here is not about the pursuit of idealized heroism, but the surprising resilience of the human or divine spirit, even in the face of its own staggering incompetence. So, next time you hear a tale of a Greek hero, remember to appreciate the absurdity of it all. They weren't heroes, they were just incredibly lucky survivors of their own misadventures. And frankly, that's rather heroic in its own right, isn't it? Or perhaps just incredibly entertaining. The line, my dear readers, is blurry indeed. Let's delve deeper into the curious case of these so called heroic quests, shall we? We've established that our Greek heroes weren't exactly paragons of virtue, but rather a collection of impulsive, often reckless individuals who somehow stumbled into legendary status. Now, let's examine the actual quests themselves, stripping away the layers of romanticized narrative to reveal the sheer absurdity of it all. Take Heracles' 12 labors, for example, presented as feats of superhuman strength and unwavering dedication. They read more like a divine punishment, meticulously crafted by a particularly sadistic deity with a penchant for practical jokes. The Nemean lion, a beast of immense strength and ferocity, was dispatched, yes, but only after a grueling struggle that likely involved more than a few scraped knees and a severely bruised ego. Heracles, the epitome of strength, nearly became a rather substantial lion snack. Was this a testament to his unwavering heroism, or simply a testament to his uncanny ability to survive a series of near death experiences? I'd argue the latter. Then there's the Erymanthian boar, a creature whose rampage sounds suspiciously like a particularly rowdy bachelor party gone wrong. Heracles, in his infinite wisdom, decided to hunt it down, not through cunning strategy or thoughtful planning, but by driving the boar into a deep snowdrift, essentially trapping it and rendering it surprisingly immobile. Was this a display of superior intellect and battle strategy, or a rather fortunate accident aided by a timely snowfall? Again, I'm leaning towards the latter. It's like winning a game of poker with only a pair of twos. Sure, you won, but that's more a matter of sheer luck than strategic genius. And what about the Augean stables? Cleaning the stables of King Augeas, a task that involved diverting 2 rivers to flush away decades' worth of accumulated manure. We're not talking about a simple spring cleaning here. This was an environmental remediation project of epic proportions, undertaken not out of altruism, but as part of a labor imposed by a vengeful Hera. Imagine the sheer logistical nightmare, the smell, the sheer volume of waste. Heracles' triumph here wasn't so much a victory as a massive, albeit slightly smelly, public works project. His other labors similarly lack the heroic sheen we've traditionally been fed. The capture of the Ceryneian hind, a creature with antlers of pure gold, was less a strategic takedown and more a prolonged game of chase that could have easily ended in Heracles becoming lunch for a particularly stylish woodland creature. The capture of the Stymphalian birds, monstrous avian predators, was more an exercise in mass slaughter than a demonstration of finesse, resulting in a sizable number of Ovian casualties and a questionable carbon footprint. Each labor, when examined closely, appears less a display of heroic valor and more a protracted exercise in self-inflicted suffering. But Heracles isn't alone in his quest for unnecessary suffering. Odysseus, the supposedly cunning king of Ithaca, embarks on a 10-year journey home, a journey more notable for its endless string of near fatal misadventures than for any impressive display of strategic planning. The Cyclops incident, for instance. Blinding Polyphemus was less a masterstroke of tactical brilliance and more a rash, impulsive act born out of both arrogance and a surprising lack of foresight. It's the equivalent of shouting insults at a bear and being astonished when it bites back. Intelligent? Not really. Resilient? Undeniably. And quite possibly insane. His encounter with Circe, let's not forget, resulted in him and his crew spending a considerable amount of time under the spell of a sorceress who, let's be frank, had some seriously questionable decorating choices. It's one thing to be caught in a magical trap, but the interiors are important, are they not? This wasn't a strategic alliance. It was a prolonged party with a slightly unhinged hostess, one that would make any competent leader question their judgment, even if it didn't involve any actual drinking. And the sirens? His escape from their deadly songs was less a testament to his willpower and more a testament to his crew's ingenuity in tying him to the mast. Odysseus, facing the potential for ultimate self-destruction by beautiful sounds, employed a rather rudimentary form of self-restraint, hardly the stuff of legends or sophisticated behavioral strategies. It's more reminiscent of a child being restrained from touching a hot stove, a measure less of personal strength and more of pure necessity. Let's not forget the Trojan War, the decade-long conflict ignited by a stolen woman. This wasn't a noble crusade. It was a large-scale brawl fueled by ego, ambition, and a ridiculously flimsy excuse. 10 years of bloodshed, devastation, and countless lost lives, all because of a woman who, in all likelihood, was completely uninvolved in the planning. The heroes involved, Achilles, Hector, Ajax, are often portrayed as paragons of courage, but a more nuanced examination reveals a collection of flawed individuals driven by personal glory and a breathtaking lack of diplomacy. Their heroism was often overshadowed by an almost suicidal disregard for their own well-being and the collective well-being of almost everyone else. The Trojan horse, often cited as a masterpiece of military strategy, might equally be interpreted as a ridiculously lucky gamble that succeeded due to a monumental error in judgment by the Trojans. It wasn't necessarily brilliant strategy. It was a desperate act fueled by frustration and a healthy dose of desperation. It was like winning the lottery, extremely lucky but not indicative of skill or planning. The war itself was a protracted exercise in mutual self-destruction, a testament to the enduring human capacity for senseless conflict and self-inflicted suffering. The eventual victory feels more like a relief than a celebration of military genius, more a celebration that it was finally over. These examples paint a picture of heroic quests, not as triumphs of skill and strategy, but as a prolonged exercises in self-harm, fueled by hubris, poor decision-making, and a generous helping of divine intervention, or, perhaps more accurately, divine malice. The gods, in their capriciousness, seemed to delight in setting these heroes on quests designed not for their betterment or glory, but for their prolonged torment and the amusement of the celestial observers. These were not heroic quests. They were carefully orchestrated exercises in useless suffering wrapped in a glorious, albeit slightly absurd narrative. And that, my friends, is the truly heroic part, surviving the sheer absurdity of it all. And perhaps a cautionary tale for us all to consider before embarking on our own poorly thought out adventures. After all, sometimes the greatest heroism is simply the ability to avoid a completely avoidable disaster, or at the very least, the ability to tell a truly entertaining tale about it afterwards. Let's face it, the Olympian pantheon wasn't exactly known for its stellar customer service. Think of them as a celestial HOA, perpetually embroiled in petty squabbles and utterly incapable of resolving even the simplest of issues. Their help, when it arrived, often resembled a cosmic kick in the teeth, disguised as a divine favor. The Trojan War, for example, a decade of bloodshed, all because of a stolen wife and a golden apple with some seriously questionable judgment calls from its judges. Was Paris's judgment truly so poor, or were the goddesses involved simply participating in a cosmic popularity contest, fully aware of the potential consequences for mere mortals? One wonders if they even considered a simple mediation session, perhaps over ambrosia and nectar, before unleashing a decade of carnage upon the unsuspecting populace. The lack of celestial diplomacy is truly staggering. And who could forget the myriad plagues unleashed upon unsuspecting populations? The gods seem to possess a peculiar delight in inflicting suffering on mortals, often for the pettiest of reasons. A slightly off key hymn, instant plague. A displeasing sacrifice? Expect a swarm of locusts, or worse, a particularly nasty case of dysentery. One can only imagine the divine board meeting where these catastrophic events were planned, complete with celestial spreadsheets detailing the number of mortals to be afflicted, perhaps with a projected timeline for widespread misery and suffering. There were never any minutes from these meetings. Even the gods wouldn't dare to memorialize such malevolent actions. It's a wonder they didn't need hazard pay. Consider the case of Oedipus, a man cursed from birth due to the machinations of a particularly vengeful father. A tale often lauded as a tragedy of fate, it might equally be viewed as a prime example of divine incompetence. The gods, with their prophetic powers, could have easily intervened, preventing the catastrophe. Instead, they chose to sit back, sip their nectar, and watch the unfolding drama unfold with the detached amusement of cosmic voyeurs. It's like setting up a meticulously crafted Rube Goldberg machine designed to inflict maximum suffering, then applauding the final, disastrous outcome. The sheer lack of foresight and empathy is astounding. What were their ethical review boards doing? Surely, there's a celestial protocol regarding mortal suffering, or at the very least, some sort of divine disclaimer. And let's not forget the role of Hera, queen of the gods, and arguably the most vindictive member of the celestial HOA. Her relentless pursuit of Heracles' torment is legendary, turning his heroic labors into a series of near-death experiences orchestrated by a being who should have been focused on more important things, such as improving the efficiency of Mount Olympus's garbage disposal system. Every thunderbolt aimed at Heracles wasn't a display of godly justice. It was a well-aimed temper tantrum, expertly thrown at a rather unlucky mortal and only slightly less effective than Zeus's lightning bolts. The gods' meddling wasn't limited to individual tragedies. Their interventions often had unforeseen consequences, resulting in widespread chaos and destruction. Think of the story of Pandora's box. While the story might be meant as a cautionary tale about human curiosity, it might also be interpreted as a colossal failure of divine risk assessment, a box containing every conceivable evil carelessly unleashed upon the unsuspecting world. It sounds less like a deliberate act and more like a catastrophic accident waiting to happen. One wonders about the subsequent celestial litigation concerning liability for the resulting damage. Were there any celestial insurance policies involved? Did Zeus even have a homeowner's policy? And what were the rates for celestial litigation insurance? The sheer thoughtlessness is enough to drive any mortal to madness, let alone one burdened with the existence of such an extremely poor risk assessment scheme. Even when the gods appeared to offer aid, it was often laced with insidious traps. Consider the numerous prophecies that led heroes to their doom. These pronouncements weren't helpful guides. They were meticulously crafted puzzles designed to mislead and confuse. Those weren't helpful directions. They were more akin to a bad map leading to a dead end. The oracles were less reliable than a fortune cookie, their pronouncements cryptic and often deliberately misleading, leading to situations far worse than if they hadn't gotten involved. The gods weren't merely passive observers, they were active participants in the unfolding drama of human existence, their interventions frequently exacerbating problems rather than solving them. They weren't neutral arbiters of fate. They were actively engaged in creating chaos with a level of creative destruction that would make any modern day reality TV producer envious. Their actions consistently defy any sensible notion of cause and effect, logic, or even basic common sense. The world of mortals was their cosmic playground, and humans were simply toys to be manipulated, tormented, and occasionally tossed aside. The gods' involvement wasn't a display of benevolent oversight. It was a cosmic comedy of errors, played out on the grand stage of human existence. The consistent absurdity of divine intervention highlights a fundamental truth. The gods, in all their supposed omnipotence, were remarkably incompetent. Their supposed wisdom was often overshadowed by petty squabbles, impulsive decisions, and a baffling lack of empathy. They were less wise, all knowing beings, and more like a group of mischievous, attention seeking children with access to cosmic powers. Their interventions weren't displays of benevolent governance. They were exercises in capricious power mongering. They were the worst kind of busybodies. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of divine intervention is its inherent unpredictability. One could never be certain whether the gods would offer aid or inflict disaster. Their actions seemed guided by whimsy, impulse, or perhaps something worse, sheer, unadulterated spite. Their actions, far from promoting harmony and balance, served to destabilize and upend mortal lives. The conclusion we must reach, therefore, is inescapable. Divine intervention, for the most part, was a disaster, a poorly managed, chaotically executed, and ultimately destructive force that served only to complicate and worsen the lives of mortals. They were not benevolent deities guiding humanity. They were chaotic forces of nature, albeit ones with a penchant for theatrical pronouncements and poorly thought out plans. And that, my friends, is a far more accurate and arguably more entertaining history of divine dysfunction than we've been previously led to believe. The true miracle is that humanity survived. Ah, Zeus, the king of the gods, wielder of the thunderbolt, and let's just say, a serial offender when it comes to matters of the heart, or rather, the loins. If he were on a modern dating app, his profile would be a cautionary tale, a red flag waving so violently it would probably trigger a global weather event. Imagine the profile picture: a majestic figure, perhaps a little too muscular, a bit too brooding, and definitely radiating an air of, I'm going to impregnate you whether you like it or not. His bio would likely start with a blatant exaggeration of his accomplishments: Supreme Ruler of Olympus, Commander of the armies of heaven, expert at cloud manipulation, and other things. The other things would, of course, be left tantalizingly vague, hinting at a past riddled with conquests, betrayals, and a complete lack of respect for boundaries. He'd probably include a picture of his eagle, a rather unimpressed looking bird, as if to say, see, even my bird is skeptical of my dating practices. His list of interests would be equally problematic. So long walks on the beach, preferably with nymphs, spontaneous rain showers, I'm a bit of a control freak, and passionate encounters. Your consent is negotiable. The carefully curated photos would showcase a misleadingly idyllic portrayal of his life on Olympus, subtly avoiding any mention of the constant marital strife, jealous rages, and the general air of impending doom that permeated the celestial court. One could imagine a string of matches with nymphs and goddesses, each encounter a testament to his flagrant abuse of divine power. He'd likely use disguises: a swan here, a golden shower there, a bull if the occasion called for it. It's not exactly wine and roses, but more of a wine roses and a complete disregard for the concept of informed consent. Each encounter would begin with a dazzling display of power and charm, cleverly disguised as romance. The poor woman wouldn't stand a chance against his irresistible aura and his overwhelming, divinely ordained persuasion. Consider Leda and the Swan, a classic example of consent being as fluid as the river Styx. A majestic swan, a beautiful woman, a rather inconvenient egg-laying incident. Was it love? Was it lust? Or was it simply a powerful deity taking advantage of a vulnerable mortal? One would have to say the latter. No amount of poetic license can justify the blatant power imbalance involved. It's less a romantic encounter and more a cosmic assault. Then there's Europa and the bull, yet another testament to Zeus's creative and utterly unconscionable use of disguises. The poor woman, taken on a rather unexpected voyage, probably didn't quite sign up for a bovine abduction. It's the kind of story that should have a trigger warning attached if it weren't so tragically comical. Let's not forget Danae and the Golden Shower. Talk about creative and extremely inappropriate forms of courtship. It's less romantic and more a meteorological assault, leaving one to question the safety regulations enforced on Mount Olympus's plumbing. And who could forget Métis, the clever Titaness who was eventually swallowed whole by her husband, so he wouldn't have to contend with the prophecy of her bearing a child who would overthrow him. Talk about taking the saying, get rid of the competition, to a whole new level. One suspects that Zeus's dating profile would lack the necessary detail in this particular area. One might wonder what the deal breakers were. Being swallowed whole by one's lover might appear high on the list for most people, but not for Zeus. The unfortunate women caught in Zeus's web rarely had a happy ending. Their children, often demigods, usually faced their own unique sets of challenges, largely a result of their father's irresponsible behavior and utter lack of parental commitment. This celestial deadbeat dad rarely took responsibility for his offspring, leaving them to fend for themselves in a world fraught with peril. He was less a loving father and more a cosmic sperm donor, scattering his progeny across the world with little regard for their future well being. Imagine the reviews on his dating profile. One-star ratings would be abundant. Didn't disclose his true form. 5 stars for the initial charm. 1 star for the subsequent kidnapping and traumatic experience. Another might say, he's charming until he transforms into a bull and carries you off to Crete. And yet another, extremely powerful, totally lacks emotional intelligence. Avoid at all costs. The sheer volume of negative feedback would probably cause a massive surge in the power grid, potentially triggering yet another of his infamous temper tantrums. Olympus's customer service rating would plummet if they even had a system for such a thing. His profile would be a minefield of red flags, a cautionary tale disguised as a dating ad. It would be a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the devastating consequences of ignoring consent. And yet, perhaps that's the true tragedy of Zeus's story. Despite his flaws, his misdeeds, his complete lack of accountability, he is still the king of the gods. He gets away with it all, leaving a trail of broken hearts, traumatized women, and confused demigods in his wake. His dating app profile would be less a romantic pursuit and more a monument to divine incompetence and disregard for basic human decency. It would be a masterpiece of unintentional comedy, highlighting the absurdity of a powerful being who believes his actions are justified solely because he has the power to enforce them. It's a cosmic cautionary tale. Swipe left, hard. Now, let's move on from the Olympian dating disaster that was Zeus to a tale of equally disastrous proportions, albeit on a smaller, less divinely powered scale. We're talking, of course, about Narcissus. Forget Zeus's thunderbolts. Narcissus had a different kind of weapon of mass destruction, his own reflection. While Zeus's conquests involved Olympian-level coercion and a complete disregard for consent, a recurring theme in his love life, I assure you, Narcissus's downfall was far more subtle. It wasn't about divine intervention. It was about a profound lack of self-awareness, a crippling inability to look beyond his own shimmering visage. If Zeus's dating profile was a red flag tsunami, Narcissus's would simply be a single, glaring, narcissistic selfie. Imagine Narcissus with a smartphone. No, not some clunky, ancient-looking thing. I'm talking about the latest iPhone, maybe even one of those foldable ones that cost more than a small car. He'd have a curated Instagram feed showcasing his flawless profile, perfectly sculpted jawline, and hair that defied the laws of gravity, and probably several stylists. His bio would be minimal, perhaps just a single perfectly chosen emoji, a flexing bicep, or maybe a winking face. He wouldn't need to say anything more. The picture says it all. His selfies would be legendary. Every angle meticulously planned, every filter carefully considered. He'd have a whole arsenal of selfie sticks, ring lights, and those weird little clip on lenses that promise to add a touch of artistic flair, which in reality makes everything look vaguely distorted. His followers would be a mixture of adoring fans, mostly bots, let's be honest, jealous rivals, all secretly admiring his physique, and bewildered onlookers who just can't comprehend this level of self obsession. Each post would be a carefully crafted masterpiece designed to maximize likes and comments. He'd use all the latest hashtags: self love, ironic much, FitFam, definitely questionable given his lack of exercise, no filter, utterly false, and blessed only if blessed means blessed with an exceptional amount of vanity. His stories would be a montage of him looking stunning from different angles, in different lighting conditions, and in various states of undress. It's the digital equivalent of him perpetually gazing into a pool of water. He'd probably start a fitness challenge, Narcissus challenge, encouraging his followers to achieve his level of perfection. Of course, his workout routine would mostly consist of admiring himself in the mirror and occasionally lifting a perfectly sculpted dumbbell. The comments would be flooded with people desperately trying to emulate him, creating a cycle of self doubt and unattainable beauty standards. Narcissus's influence would span generations, setting the standard for what we believe to be perfection, perpetuating toxic comparisons, and fueling the endless scroll of social media. And the comments? Oh, the comments. They'd range from the sycophantic, "You're so perfect," "OMG, your abs," to the slightly more astute, "It's getting a little much." Narcissus would, of course, selectively engage only with the positive ones, meticulously ignoring, or perhaps blocking, anyone who dared to criticize his narcissistic self promotion. He'd respond to compliments with even more selfies, subtly highlighting a new muscle he'd supposedly developed or a new angle that showcases his chiseled features even better. This would further reinforce his own narcissistic image, a carefully constructed bubble of self love and validation. He'd probably use several different dating apps, each profile mirroring his Instagram persona. He would likely only engage with other users who are clearly impressed and in awe of him. Any hint of criticism would be met with immediate unmatching. He'd be a master of the ghosting technique, leaving his many potential partners confused and wondering what they ever did wrong. In reality, it's just that no one is good enough to match his perfect self image. His relationships would be shallow, transactional interactions designed to boost his ego and affirm his belief in his own superiority. And Echo? Poor Echo, reduced to a mere echo in the digital world. Imagine her as a comment spammer, perpetually trying to get Narcissus's attention, offering her own thoughts and feelings, only to be drowned out by the relentless stream of self-promotion. Her words would be lost in the digital noise, a testament to the power of self-obsession and the tragedy of unrequited love in the age of social media. She'd likely be banned for spamming, or worse, accused of being a hater and promptly blocked. But unlike Zeus, whose divine power allowed him to escape accountability, Narcissus's punishment was in a way far more fitting. His obsession was self-inflicted, a relentless cycle of self-admiration that ultimately led to his downfall. He withered away, consumed by his own reflection, a fitting end for someone who placed so little value on anything beyond his own image. The modern equivalent might be the influencer who suddenly discovers their curated facade isn't generating the expected revenue, leading to a complete mental and emotional collapse. The perfect selfie, the perfect life, all dissolving into an abyss of disillusionment. Consider the parallels. The ancient myth speaks to a timeless truth about human nature, the danger of excessive self regard. Narcissus's reflection was his prison, his obsession, his ultimate undoing. In the modern world, our phones have become the new reflecting pools, and the endless stream of selfies, filters, and curated online personas can be just as consuming and ultimately just as self destructive. The tragic story of Narcissus is not merely a tale from ancient Greece, but a warning for the present. His is a cautionary tale of self obsession and the dangers of social media addiction. It's a reminder to look beyond the surface, to value genuine connection over superficial validation, and to avoid becoming so absorbed in our own reflections that we lose sight of the world and the people around us. It's a story that resonates across millennia, a stark reminder that true beauty lies not in the flawless selfie, but in the depth and complexity of the human spirit, a spirit that sadly Narcissus never truly glimpsed. He was too busy taking pictures of himself. And that, my friends, is the ultimate tragedy. A tragedy played out not in a secluded pool, but on the infinitely larger stage of social media. A cautionary tale for the selfie generation. Swipe left? Seriously, swipe left. Let's shift our gaze from the self absorbed Narcissus to a couple whose relationship dynamics would make even the most seasoned relationship therapist reach for the smelling salts: Orpheus and Eurydice. Their story, typically framed as a poignant tale of devotion, takes on a rather unsettling hue when examined through a modern lens. Forget the romantic lyre playing. Let's talk about codependency and unhealthy attachment. Imagine Orpheus, not as a charming musician, but as a clingy boyfriend, utterly consumed by his relationship with Eurydice. Every Instagram post features a picture of them, strategically cropped to highlight his artistic talent and her ethereal beauty. His captions are dripping with saccharine sentimentality, declarations of undying love that verge on the suffocating. He's the king of couple selfies, always ensuring that the lighting perfectly complements his melancholic gaze and her supposed radiance. His bio, something like Eurydice's devoted partner, hopelessly in love, couple goals, soulmates forever and always. Eurydice, meanwhile, is presented as a woman trapped in a relationship that has become increasingly stifling. While the myth portrays her as a passive victim, we can see her struggles, a constant need to validate Orpheus's fragile ego, always forced to play second fiddle to his artistic pursuits. She has her own interests, desires, dreams, buried under the weight of his overwhelming affection. She's the perfect Instagram wife, always smiling sweetly in those staged photos, although a careful observer might notice a slight tightening of her jaw or a flicker of exhaustion in her eyes. Their relationship isn't about mutual respect and support. It's a tangled web of codependency. Orpheus's intense emotions are not healthy. They border on obsession. His music is not just an expression of his creativity, but a tool to manipulate and control Eurydice. His songs are a constant affirmation of his love, but a silent suppression of hers. He interprets every minor setback as a threat to their bond, leading to emotional outbursts and manipulative tactics disguised as passionate displays of love. Now, let's imagine the underworld incident. Eurydice's death, in this modern retelling, isn't a tragic accident, but the culmination of years of repressed emotions and silent pleas for space. The metaphorical snakebite could be interpreted as the final straw, the ultimate manifestation of her own need to escape. Orpheus's journey to the underworld isn't a heroic act. It's a selfish attempt to reclaim his possession, blinded by his possessive love and inability to accept loss. His failure to keep his gaze on her symbolizes his incapacity for genuine connection and his inability to truly see her as a separate individual. It is a catastrophic display of a man so enmeshed in his own grief that he can't respect the fundamental boundaries of the person he supposedly loves. The condition of not looking back? It's not a test of his faith, but a reflection of his desperate need to control the narrative, even beyond the grave. His inability to resist underscores his obsession, making it clear that his love was more about possession and control than genuine connection. Next, let's consider the story of Pygmalion and Galatea. Often romanticized as a tale of artistic inspiration and love's transformative power, it's a story that also raises profound questions about objectification and the ethics of creation. Imagine Pygmalion, a modern day sculptor, not working with marble but 3D printing technology. He meticulously crafts a perfect woman, Galatea, digitally sculpting her features until she is the perfect ideal. This reflects not a romantic ideal, but an obsession with control. He doesn't fall in love with a person, he falls in love with his own creation, an idealized version of what he believes a woman should be. There's a distinct lack of agency on Galatea's part. Her very existence depends on Pygmalion's will, highlighting an uncomfortable power dynamic. Once she's alive, their relationship is not a partnership, but a master slave dynamic. Galatea has no independent thoughts, no desires of her own, mirroring her creator's fantasy. The love shared between them is not a mutual relationship. It's Pygmalion's own idealized view projected onto a blank canvas, or in this case, a 3D printed figure. This makes their relationship alarmingly close to a fetishistic fantasy. Finally, let's unpack the tale of Hades and Persephone. Typically depicted as a love story with an element of abduction, this story is rife with toxic power dynamics and a complete absence of consent. Instead of a romantic gesture, Hades' abduction can be seen as a violent act of control. Modern Hades is not a brooding god of the underworld, but a powerful CEO exploiting his position and influence to coerce Persephone into a relationship. He might not literally kidnap her, but he might use manipulative tactics like emotional blackmail or gaslighting. Persephone, initially a spirited young woman, gradually loses her independence and becomes reliant on Hades' wealth and power. This transformation, often interpreted as a sign of their love, is, in reality, a chilling manifestation of a toxic relationship. The seasonal cycle of Persephone's descent and return can be seen as a reflection of the cyclical pattern of abuse, with periods of forced compliance followed by brief moments of freedom. The romantic elements of the myth become, under closer scrutiny, tools used to excuse and normalize unhealthy patterns of behavior. The pomegranate seeds, symbols of their bond, represent a binding contract imposed on Persephone, not a symbol of shared love. They represent a forced commitment, a consequence of coercion, not a consensual act of love. It's a potent metaphor for situations where the relationship becomes an instrument for manipulation and power dynamics. Their tale, when viewed through a modern critical lens, highlights how myths often legitimize and perpetuate narratives of abuse and coercion, disguised under the guise of romantic love. These are not love stories. They are cautionary tales about the dangers of unhealthy relationships, toxic codependency, and the persistent need to examine our interpretations of the past and their resonance in the present. These relationships, rather than being celebrated as romantic ideals, serve as stark warnings about the insidious nature of power imbalances and the importance of consent in any relationship, divine or otherwise. The myths, therefore, serve as a valuable case study in unhealthy relationship patterns, providing a framework for exploring the complexities of love, lust, and the critical need for consent. Let's face it, the ancient Greeks weren't exactly known for their healthy relationship boundaries. Their myths are littered with romantic disasters of epic proportions, tales of obsession, sacrifice, and questionable decision making that would make a reality TV producer weep with joy. We've already touched upon the clingy Orpheus and the subtly suffering Eurydice and the unsettling dynamics of Pygmalion and his 3D printed Galatea, but the pantheon is overflowing with cautionary tales of love gone horribly, hilariously wrong. Take, for instance, the case of Apollo and Cassandra. Apollo, the god of music, poetry, and prophecy, among other things, was a bit of a player, and Cassandra, a princess cursed with the gift of prophecy, was, shall we say, caught in his web. Now you'd think a god with such an impressive portfolio would be a catch, but Apollo, like so many men throughout history, was utterly incapable of handling a woman who wasn't completely subservient. Their story isn't one of passionate romance. It's a tragicomedy of inflated egos and broken promises. Apollo, smitten, or perhaps just bored, granted Cassandra the ability to see the future, a gift that in his mind would surely ensure her adoration, a sort of love potion in prophecy form. He likely envisioned her breathlessly hanging on his every word, whispering prophecies that would inevitably further solidify his position as the ultimate divine heartthrob. But Cassandra, bless her pragmatic heart, saw through his manipulative charm. She foresaw his fickle nature, his propensity for infidelity, and his grandiose self-image. She saw the future, and in that future, there was no happily ever after with Apollo. This naturally infuriated Apollo. His carefully crafted romantic strategy crumbled before the harsh reality of a woman who valued self-respect over divine charisma. He retaliated in the most petulant way imaginable. He altered her gift. She would still see the future, but no one would believe her. A divine passive-aggressive move of the highest order. Imagine the frustration. She became a walking, talking, incredibly accurate oracle, constantly delivering prophecies of doom, only to be dismissed as a madwoman. The ultimate I'll show you scenario. This is not a tale of romantic passion. It's a chilling illustration of a god's inability to handle rejection, masking narcissistic rage as divine retribution. It's less a love story and more a workplace harassment lawsuit waiting to happen with the added spice of prophecy. Then there's the saga of Zeus, the king of the gods, whose love life was as chaotic as a Greek parliament. This isn't your typical love conquers all narrative. It's a hilarious, albeit alarming showcase of relentless pursuit disguised as affection. Zeus's romantic escapades involved seduction, disguise, and a blatant disregard for consent. He was the ultimate gaslighting god, transforming himself into whatever form would most effectively charm his next conquest. Think of his affair with Leda. He didn't just waltz up and woo her, he transformed himself into a magnificent swan, the feathered equivalent of a luxury sports car. He then proceeded to seduce her in a truly bizarre, possibly traumatic encounter. The result? Helen of Troy, whose face launched 1,000 ships, and a healthy dose of psychological trauma that should have been a serious cause for concern. Or consider his encounters with Io and Europa, transformed into a bull, another blatant power play disguised as romance. In essence, Zeus operated under the motto, if I can turn myself into an animal and you still consent, it's totally okay. This was definitely not informed consent. It's a textbook case of abuse of power wrapped in mythological gold leaf. The humor lies not in the act itself, but in the blatant absurdity of it all. A god, the supposedly supreme being, resorting to animal disguises to get his way. What a character! Even the seemingly gentler tales have their dark underbelly. Consider the story of Psyche and Eros, often presented as a testament to true love that conquers all obstacles. However, let's analyze the dynamics. Eros, the god of love, keeps Psyche in a secluded tower, shrouded in mystery, under constant surveillance. He visits only in darkness, forbidding her from ever seeing him. This isn't a romantic rendezvous, it's a toxic relationship. It's more akin to a thriller than a romance. The constant secrecy, the control, the lack of trust, these are not the hallmarks of a healthy relationship, divine or otherwise. It's a bit like a very long, very dramatic game of hide and seek with an overly possessive partner. Psyche's trials and tribulations are often framed as tests of her love, but they're also a demonstration of Eros's insecurities and controlling behavior. The tests are more akin to power plays, designed to maintain his dominance and control over her. Her obedience is not a sign of love, but of compliance in the face of an abusive power dynamic. It's only after Psyche endures numerous trials and displays remarkable resilience that she's finally rewarded with Eros's love. It's a problematic message, to say the least. It seems less like a testament to a happy ending and more like a demonstration of endurance in the face of unnecessary suffering. So, what's the takeaway here? The price of love in Greek mythology, it seems, was often exorbitant. Sacrifices were made, boundaries were crossed, and often obliterated, and the consequences were frequently catastrophic. These aren't just tales of romance, they are cautionary tales, darkly comical reminders of the irrational choices we make in the name of love, and how often those choices reveal more about the flaws of the lovers than the strength of their affections. It's a lesson, perhaps, in examining our own expectations of love and recognizing the crucial role of consent healthy boundaries, and a severe lack of shape-shifting in any relationship. The ancient Greeks, despite their poetic prose and breathtaking tragedies, provided us with a rich repository of cautionary tales dressed up in the glittering robes of myth. And that, my friends, is a legacy worth laughing about. Ah, love potions. The very phrase conjures images of bubbling cauldrons, whiskered witches, and hapless victims falling head over heels for the completely undeserving. But the ancient world, particularly the Greek world, offered a much more nuanced and considerably more hilarious take on the matter. Forget the romantic comedies of today. Their versions involved far more goat entrails and significantly less happily ever after. Let's start with the obvious. Circe, the sorceress of Aoaa, renowned for transforming Odysseus's men into swine. Now, one might argue that this wasn't exactly a love potion in the traditional sense. It wasn't designed to inspire passionate devotion. Rather, it was a rather brutal demonstration of power, a take that, to a band of rather unruly sailors. Yet, consider the underlying motivation. Was it purely revenge, or was there a hint of something more twisted? Perhaps she was simply tired of the constant influx of boisterous, sea weary men, and turning them into oinking, mud wallowing pigs was her way of enforcing a strict no men policy on her island paradise. A radical feminist approach, one might say, albeit a rather extreme one. It's definitely a conversation starter at any mythological cocktail party. Then we have Medea, a sorceress of a considerably different caliber. She was not merely manipulative, she was a master class in vengeful magic. Her love for Jason was, to put it mildly, tempestuous. It burned brightly, then raged with the fury of 1,000 suns before ultimately consuming everything in its path. When Jason jilted her for Glaus, a princess with a significantly more advantageous lineage, Medea unleashed a torrent of magical mayhem that would make even the most seasoned horror movie director envious. Her actions highlight a crucial element often overlooked in these tales: the consequences. These weren't simple cases of someone slipping a love potion into someone's drink. These were acts of potent magic, designed not only to manipulate emotions, but often resulting in devastating consequences for all involved, including the perpetrator. The sheer scale of Medea's revenge is, frankly, spectacular. It's an operatic tragedy wrapped in a spellbinding cloak of magical carnage, leaving a trail of bodies and charred earth in its wake. But let's not dwell solely on the dramatic and overtly vengeful uses of magic. Let's consider the subtler forms of manipulation, the insidious whispers and carefully crafted illusions. Aphrodite, goddess of love, was not above a little manipulation herself. She didn't always resort to blatant magic, but her influence was often more effective because it worked on a subtler level. She was the master of suggestion, the whisper in the ear, the carefully planted seed of desire. Remember the Trojan War? That whole debacle, a bloody conflict that laid waste to countless lives, could be partly attributed to Aphrodite's meddling. It wasn't a potion, but her manipulation, her weaving of desire and obsession, was just as potent, if not more so, than any magical concoction. And what about Helen? Was she simply a victim of Aphrodite's machinations, or did she play a role in her own abduction? Was her beauty a curse, A magnet for the desires of powerful men? Or was it a deliberate weapon, a tool she used to navigate the treacherous landscape of Mycenaean politics? The question of agency, of choice and consent, is crucial in these stories. The lines are often blurred, the motivations complex, and the consequences far reaching. This is where things get truly interesting. The morality of these actions is far from clear cut. Were the women victims of powerful men and their magical manipulations? Or did they actively participate in these intoxicating games of desire and deception? The truth, as often is the case, is considerably more nuanced. Jealousy, then, enters the fray, a potent catalyst, a volatile ingredient that often compounded the effects of magic or acted as a potent magic all its own. Consider the myths surrounding Hera, queen of the gods, whose jealousy was as legendary as Zeus's infidelity. Her wrath was not simply the result of hurt feelings, it was a force of nature, a divine tempest unleashed upon those who dared to cross her. Her jealousy wasn't just a personal failing, it was a driving force that shaped events, punished rivals, and sowed discord among the Olympians. One might even argue that Hera was a more powerful force than many of the potions and spells that appear throughout Greek mythology. Her rage was a potent weapon, often more destructive than any physical spell. Moreover, this jealousy wasn't simply directed at Zeus's lovers. It extended to anyone who dared to challenge her authority or status. It wasn't love that motivated her, but rather the primal and destructive force of envy, something frequently and tragically lacking in the romantic narratives surrounding her husband's actions. We see a similar pattern repeated in the myths. Hecuba, queen of Troy, whose fury and grief after the fall of Troy were amplified by her relentless jealousy. Her suffering was compounded by her helplessness, her rage amplified by her inability to control her destiny. Her pain becomes yet another warning against the destructive power of jealousy and the consequences of unchecked male power. This brings us to a more complex concept: the blurred lines between love, lust, and power. Many of these love potions were not about romantic affection. They were about asserting dominance, controlling others, and achieving one's own desires. They were tools of manipulation, used by the powerful to bend the weak to their will. The stories often emphasize the imbalance of power, with gods and sorceresses wielding magic to control mortals. The humor comes, perhaps, from the absurdity of these attempts. A god resorting to deception? A sorceress concocting a potion to win someone's heart? It's inherently comical, but it's also deeply problematic. It's a reminder that true love, genuine affection, doesn't require spells or manipulation. It's found in respect, trust, and yes, consent. A concept sadly absent from many of these classic tales. In conclusion, the ancient Greeks were masters of storytelling, weaving tales of love, lust, and betrayal that still resonate with us today. Their myths offer a unique perspective on the complexities of human relationships, exploring the role of magic, manipulation, and jealousy in matters of the heart. These stories are not simply romantic tales, they're cautionary fables, darkly comical narratives that remind us of the potential for chaos and disaster when desire, power, and a complete lack of consent collide. They highlight the absurdity of trying to control love with magic, highlighting instead the crucial importance of genuine connection, respect, and yes, a healthy dose of skepticism towards suspiciously bubbly concoctions. It's a lesson best learned not from a love potion, but from the cautionary tales spun by some of history's greatest storytellers. And of course, it's a lesson best delivered with a generous helping of humor. Let's be frank, the Olympian gods weren't exactly known for their journalistic integrity. Their accounts of events, often relayed through adoring poets or terrified mortals, tend to be, shall we say, self serving. One might even call it divine spin, a masterful manipulation of narratives designed to bolster their own reputations and deflect blame. Think of it as a pre Socratic version of fake news, spread by beings with the power to hurl lightning bolts at anyone who dared to question their version of reality. Take Zeus, for instance, the king of the gods himself. His amorous adventures are legendary, a veritable catalog of conquests spanning the mortal and immortal realms. Yet, how often do we hear his side of the story? Rarely. Instead, we get accounts filtered through the perspectives of his scorned wives, his enraged lovers, or the terrified victims of his sudden, often unwelcome affections. He's the ultimate unreliable narrator, spinning tales of irresistible charm and divine right, conveniently omitting the details of coercion, rape, and the general chaos that usually accompanied his romantic escapades. His love affairs frequently resembled a divine invasion more than a romantic entanglement, leaving a trail of broken hearts, shattered families, and monstrous offspring in their wake. One wonders how many of his conquests were consensual and how many were simply acts of power disguised as romance. It is a troubling thought. One is left to question whether we are interpreting these narratives as acts of love or acts of blatant power. Consider his relationship with Leda, the story of Zeus transforming himself into a swan to seduce her is a textbook example of divine propaganda at its finest. The image is aesthetically pleasing, a poetic metaphor for seduction. But let's dissect this carefully. A powerful god taking advantage of a mortal woman under false pretenses, hardly a romantic encounter. The narrative carefully avoids the implications of non consent, focusing instead on the miraculous birth of Helen and Clytemnestra, two women who would significantly shape the core of Greek history and the events of the Trojan War, their births becoming a convenient justification for the gods' actions. It's a masterclass in distraction, diverting attention from the act of violation to the consequences, however significant. The narrative paints a picture of irresistible charm, not coercive power, a picture that is clearly biased and favors the protagonist, Zeus. Then there's Poseidon, god of the sea, equally adept at manipulating narratives. His encounters often involved a similar pattern: desire, coercion, and a healthy dose of divine arrogance. The story of his pursuit of Medusa is a particularly dark illustration of this. His actions are presented as a just punishment, a consequence of Medusa's supposed transgression, not as an act of aggression by a powerful god against a vulnerable mortal. The narrative conveniently shifts the blame onto Medusa. Again, the focus shifts from the act of violation to the consequences. In these cases, the narratives are far from innocent. They paint a picture of the god's righteous anger, hiding the darker truth of his lust and misuse of power. It's a blatant attempt to rewrite history, to present himself as a hero rather than a perpetrator. Even the seemingly benevolent goddesses weren't immune to this manipulation. Aphrodite, goddess of love, was, as we've touched upon, quite adept at stirring up trouble. Her role in sparking the Trojan War wasn't just a matter of divine intervention, it was a calculated act of manipulation, a demonstration of power masked as the whims of fate. While the narrative positions Paris's judgment as the cause of the war, it glosses over the significant role Aphrodite played in influencing his choice and subsequently setting the events of the Trojan War in motion. The fact that the war was caused by the actions of a god is conveniently swept under the rug. Her actions appear to be those of destiny. They were clearly a calculated move by the goddess. And what about Hera, queen of the gods? Her jealousy, often presented as a flaw, is frequently portrayed as the driving force behind many tragic events. The narrative rarely examines the root causes of her anger, the systemic injustices and patriarchal structures that fueled her insecurities. Instead, she is often depicted as a spiteful, vindictive figure, a jealous wife enacting revenge on her husband's lovers. The narrative frequently overlooks the context of her anger and resentment, choosing to portray her as a jealous wife rather than a victim of a systemic abuse of power. This is a significant bias in the narrative, one that hides the significant truth that is present in her story. Hera's anger is not solely a personal flaw, but a reflection of a deeply flawed system, and it's a narrative that often silences her justified resentment. The key here is to recognize the limitations of the sources. These myths weren't written by neutral observers. They were created and transmitted by those with vested interests, by those who sought to shape public perception and legitimize their power. To accept these narratives at face value is to fall victim to a sophisticated form of divine propaganda, one that has persisted for millennia. Reading these myths as if they were objective historical accounts is a mistake. Rather, one should consider them as complex and multifaceted stories that reveal a lot more about the power dynamics of ancient Greece than about the divine truth. They were tools for control, employed to maintain social order and reinforce existing power structures. The postmodern lens encourages us to deconstruct these narratives, to uncover the hidden biases and power plays that shape the stories. It calls for a critical examination of authorship, perspective, and the very nature of truth. Instead of passively accepting the gods' versions of events, we should engage in active interpretation, questioning the motives behind the narratives, and seeking alternative perspectives from those whose voices have been silenced or marginalized. The unreliable narrator trope, so prevalent in modern fiction, finds its ancient roots in these very myths. The gods, with their overwhelming power and capacity for deception, were the original masters of manipulation, experts at shaping the narrative to their own advantage. Their stories offer us a cautionary tale, not just about the dangers of unchecked power, but about the importance of critical thinking and media literacy, even when the media consists of divinely inspired epics and legends. The moral of the story: believe nothing you hear from a god, especially if they're trying to sell you a version of reality designed to maintain their power. And always, always be skeptical, especially when the narratives favor the powerful, because, as we've seen, their narratives are far from innocent and are significantly biased in their favor. Fate versus free will The age old philosophical tussle played out on the grand stage of Olympus with all the subtlety of a drunken satyr trying to play a lyre. One might think, given the god's penchant for meddling, that the answer would be a resounding fate, a cosmic puppet show orchestrated by beings who could snap their fingers and change the course of rivers, let alone human lives. Yet, the Greeks, bless their chaotic hearts, seemed equally fascinated by the concept of free will, the notion that individuals could shape their own destinies, even if those destinies frequently involved being eaten by a monstrous creature or becoming a tragic footnote in a much larger divine drama. Take Oedipus, for example. The poor fellow, doomed from the moment he was born to kill his father and marry his mother, a plot twist that would make even the most jaded screenwriter blush. Now, you could argue that this is the ultimate testament to the power of fate, a preordained tragedy that no amount of running away to Corinth could prevent. And yet, Oedipus, with all the stubbornness of a mule and the questionable judgment of a particularly intoxicated cyclops, actively chooses to ignore the prophecies. He takes decisions, arguably poor ones, but decisions nonetheless. He actively steers the ship, even if he steers it straight into an iceberg of incest and patricide. Was it fate that led him to those specific decisions, or was it his own volition? The absurdity is deliciously frustrating. It's as if the universe was actively rooting for the ultimate dramatic irony. Then we have Heracles, that paragon of strength and questionable impulse control. He was clearly the poster child for free will, smashing his way through 12 seemingly impossible labors, all while managing to simultaneously be the most successful and the most accident prone hero in Greek mythology. He constantly made choices, some brilliant, like inventing the Olympic Games, genius really, others less so, like, killing his family while in a divinely induced rage. His life was a series of challenges, some divinely imposed, some self inflicted, but everyone a testament to his capacity for action, for choice. He wasn't passively swept along by the currents of fate. He was a maelstrom of muscle and questionable decision making, actively shaping his own tumultuous life. But here's where things get truly hilarious and existentially terrifying. Even the gods themselves seem to struggle with this whole fate versus free will conundrum. Zeus, that supreme overlord of the heavens, is notorious for his capricious nature, his sudden bursts of divine inspiration, often involving inappropriate sexual advances, suggesting that even he is not entirely in control. He's constantly meddling, but his meddling itself suggests a lack of absolute power, an inability to dictate the precise outcome of his actions. He's a god who seems to be constantly improvising. His power is absolute, but his actions aren't always perfectly planned. The results are, frequently, chaotic and unintended, as any mortal who's ever been on the receiving end of his divine wrath can attest. Consider the Trojan War, that epic clash of civilizations, supposedly ignited by the judgment of Paris. Was it fate that led Paris to choose Aphrodite, or was it a series of human choices, influenced by divine intervention, that culminated in a decade of bloodshed and the utter annihilation of Troy? Was it preordained by the fates, or was it a sequence of escalating decisions? The sheer complexity of the conflict suggests a terrifying blend of both. The result? a war that reshaped the ancient world, a beautifully tragic chain reaction of seemingly inevitable events. The gods are clearly involved, influencing and manipulating events, but the outcome is never truly predictable, even for them. And what about the fates themselves? Those enigmatic weavers of destiny, spinning the threads of human life. Are they the ultimate arbiters of fate? Or are they merely recorders of choices, diligently documenting the consequences of actions both divinely influenced and purely human? Their role in Greek mythology is wonderfully ambiguous, a constant reminder that even in a world seemingly governed by destiny, there's always room for the absurd, the unexpected, the wonderfully human capacity for making truly terrible decisions. The beauty and terror of Greek mythology lies in its refusal to offer easy answers. It's a tapestry woven with threads of both fate and free will, a complex interplay of divine intervention and human agency, of preordained tragedy and the gloriously unpredictable nature of life. The gods might pull the strings, but mortals, with their flawed judgment and remarkable capacity for making monumentally bad choices, frequently manage to improvise their way into completely unexpected outcomes. It's a comedic chaos, a grand, absurd spectacle of divine intervention and human folly, reminding us that even in the face of seemingly predetermined destiny, we retain an unsettling amount of agency. Our lives, much like a particularly boisterous symposium, are a chaotic mix of cosmic design and sheer, unadulterated human silliness. Perhaps the most hilarious and ultimately unsettling aspect of the entire debate is the apparent lack of consensus even amongst the immortals. The gods themselves seem to be constantly disagreeing on the very nature of free will and fate, offering conflicting prophecies and intervening in human affairs in ways that seem almost arbitrary. It is a reflection of the chaotic and unpredictable nature of life itself. It reminds us that the grand cosmic plan is perhaps far less grand and far more messy than we might like to think, and that, perhaps, is the most deeply satisfyingly ironic aspect of it all. So, next time you find yourself grappling with the existential dread of your own mortality or the crippling weight of seemingly unavoidable circumstances, remember the Greeks. Remember Oedipus, blindly stumbling towards his predetermined doom. Remember Heracles, eternally embroiled in self-inflicted crises. Remember the gods, those masters of manipulation whose plans regularly go hilariously awry. Laugh, weep, perhaps even throw a few grapes at a statue of Zeus. After all, what's the point of facing the absurdity of existence without a healthy dose of dark humor? The very notion of preordained destiny in a universe filled with capricious deities is deeply hilarious, even if it is sometimes rather terrifying. The clash between fate and free will isn't a simple equation. It's a messy, often farcical reflection of the human experience. And that, my friends, is truly something to ponder over a nice glass of ambrosia, or failing that, a decent Chardonnay. The absurdity of existence is, after all, worth celebrating, even especially when it feels completely out of control. Embrace the chaos, the uncertainty, the wonderfully unpredictable nature of being human. And remember, even the gods aren't quite sure what's going on. And that, my friends, is the most liberating thought of all. The ultimate cosmic joke, perhaps. The constant comedic tension between what seems to be preordained and what simply arises from the unpredictable actions of mortals. The sheer absurdity of it all. Imagine, if you will, the pantheon of Olympus, those supposedly omnipotent beings demanding sacrifices. Not just any sacrifices, mind you, but often the most ludicrous, impractical, and frankly wasteful offerings imaginable. One might expect a god of thunder to demand something suitably impressive, a mountain of gold, perhaps, or a legion of perfectly trained hoplites. Instead, we find Zeus frequently demanding the most inconvenient of things, the firstborn son of a king, for instance, or a particularly prized bull with exceptionally fine horns. One can almost picture the divine bureaucracy involved in processing such requests. One firstborn son, please, preferably one with minimal complaints. And, is it possible to get a bull with extra long horns? It's for a sacred bull roasting competition, and the sheer wastefulness. Consider Iphigenia, a perfectly good princess, sacrificed to appease Artemis, a young woman brimming with potential, reduced to ashes on an altar, all for a favorable wind. One can only imagine the economic impact on Mycenaean society, the cost of her upbringing, the potential loss of her future contributions to the kingdom, all wiped out in a puff of sacrificial smoke. From a purely economic standpoint, it was disastrous. One could argue that investing in education or infrastructure would have yielded a far greater return than appeasing a temperamental goddess with a human sacrifice. It beggars belief. Then there's the matter of the sheer randomness. The gods were notoriously fickle in their demands. One day they might crave 1,000 doves, the next a single exquisitely carved wooden statue of a goat. Imagine the logistical nightmare for the priests. The supply chain management must have been atrocious. Were there contracts with dove breeders? Did the procurement of perfectly carved goat statues require specialized artisans? One shudders to think of the bureaucratic red tape involved in such a capricious system. It's enough to give even the most dedicated bureaucrat nightmares. Let's not forget the sheer inefficiency of it all. These sacrifices, often involving expensive animals, precious metals, and even human lives, weren't exactly sustainable practices. One might imagine the environmental impact of annually sacrificing thousands of animals to appease a collection of largely indifferent deities. It's a wasteful practice, even from an environmentally sustainable perspective. Did anyone consider the carbon footprint of that sacrificial pyre? And let's be frank, the return on investment was questionable at best. One would think that a few well-placed prayers, perhaps a carefully crafted offering of honey cakes, might have yielded similar results with far less bloodshed and inconvenience. It's as if the gods were intentionally designing a system that was both inefficient and incredibly wasteful. A divine version of an elaborate Ponzi scheme, perhaps. But perhaps the most hilariously tragic aspect of these sacrifices was the sheer lack of guarantee of success. Even after offering up the most lavish of gifts, the most prized possessions, or even the most dearly loved family members, there was no guarantee that the gods would be appeased. It was a gamble, a bet placed on the whims of capricious beings who seemed to delight in the unexpected. Imagine the disappointment of a king who'd sacrificed his daughter only to find his crops still failing. The sheer audacity of the gods to demand such a thing and then refuse to deliver their end of the bargain. The system was completely broken, yet it persisted for centuries. One can't help but wonder if the whole sacrificial system was a grand cosmic joke perpetrated on humanity by a bunch of mischievous immortals who delighted in their power to demand sacrifices. A sort of divine extortion racket, perhaps. They established a system where their capriciousness was directly and negatively affecting the mortals, all while requiring lavish payments that were entirely at the whim of the gods. The irony is, of course, that the very act of sacrificing was presented as a way to appease the gods' wrath, yet the acts themselves were often the direct cause of great suffering and chaos. The moral quandaries are immense, aren't they? Consider the priests themselves, caught in a paradoxical situation. Were they merely following established ritual, or were they complicit in a system built on irrationality and exploitation? And what of the mortals who offered their sacrifices? Were they driven by genuine piety, or by a desperate fear of divine retribution? The lines are blurred, and the answers, sadly, are often uncomfortable. The absurdity lies in the fact that the entire system was built on a foundation of faith, a faith which often yielded more despair than divine favor. Think of the sheer absurdity of it. Perfectly good wine being poured into the earth, precious metals melting in sacrificial fires, and human lives extinguished on altars, all in the name of a being whose motives often seemed as incomprehensible as their capricious demands. The gods, after all, were not known for their impeccable decision-making skills. They were prone to fits of rage, bouts of irrationality, and moments of stunning incompetence. One might be forgiven for thinking that a more rational approach to religious observance might have been in order. Perhaps a simple letter or even a well-placed bribe might have been more effective. The notion that they needed such costly, violent gestures to be pleased raises questions about their true power and their motivations. And what about the psychological impact? The constant fear of divine wrath, the pervasive belief that one's fate was entirely dependent on the whims of immortal beings, must have been a tremendously unsettling thing to live with. The entire cultural landscape was shaped by this constant anticipation of divine judgment, a judgment that was entirely unpredictable and largely unmerited. It's a profoundly unsettling system, one that demanded absolute obedience, but offered no guarantee of safety. In conclusion, the sacrifices offered to the Greek gods were not merely religious acts. They were a darkly comedic reflection of human desperation, irrationality, and our inherent need to appease forces far greater than ourselves. The irony is, of course, that the very acts intended to bring favor often resulted in chaos and suffering. The sacrifices were a waste of perfectly good offerings, a testament to the absurdity of religious ritual, and a poignant reminder of the unpredictable and often unsettling nature of the divine. One can't help but wonder if, perhaps, a few well-placed jokes might have been more effective. Perhaps the gods, after all, secretly appreciated a good laugh. Or maybe, just maybe, they were laughing at us. The whole affair, from beginning to end, is laced with a dark, ironic humor that only adds to the unsettling nature of the sacrifices. And that, my friends, is a story worthy of the gods themselves, or at least a very good academic paper. Now let's move on to the truly farcical aspects of the Olympian legal system, or rather, the lack thereof. Justice, in the realm of the gods, was less a carefully considered process and more a chaotic free for all, a cosmic game of pin the tail on the wrongdoer, played with thunderbolts and plagues. Forget your due process, your impartial judges, your meticulously documented evidence. In Olympus, judgment was swift, arbitrary, and often wildly disproportionate to the crime. Consider the case of Sisyphus, for instance. The fellow was a bit of a scoundrel, yes, tricking Thanatos, the personification of death, into chaining him up. A rather audacious move, one might say, but hardly deserving of eternal punishment. Rolling a boulder uphill for all eternity? Seriously? Even a petty god would have devised a more creative and less physically taxing punishment. One almost feels sympathy for the man, a victim of his own cleverness, doomed to a Sisyphean task that would leave even the most dedicated gym goer utterly exhausted. And the sheer inefficiency, the cosmic resources wasted on this endless task could have been put to far better use. Imagine the paperwork involved in recording Sisyphus's daily progress, or lack thereof, across the eons. And what of Tantalus, the man who dared to serve the gods, his own son, for dinner? Now that was a transgression, no question. But the punishment? Eternal thirst and hunger, surrounded by water and fruit he could never reach. It's cruel, certainly, but also incredibly inefficient. Imagine the divine catering budget. The constant replenishing of fruits and water, eternally untouched, must have been a logistical nightmare. One wonders if there wasn't a more practical and perhaps even cost-effective form of punishment. Community service, perhaps? A few millennia spent cleaning the Augean stables would certainly provide more tangible results. The lack of due process, of course, is appalling. Did Tantalus have a lawyer? Did he even get a chance to plead his case? It seems unlikely. It's more a case of divine whim than actual justice. Then there's the matter of divine revenge. The Olympians, bless their hearts, were masters of petty revenge. A slight offense to Hera, and boom, you've got yourself a full-blown family feud, complete with adultery, betrayal, and a healthy dose of divine wrath. Think of the Trojan War, ostensibly started because of a stolen apple. A single piece of fruit ignites a decade-long conflict, resulting in the deaths of countless people. One might think a diplomatic solution could have been found, perhaps a strongly worded letter of complaint, or maybe an intervention by a neutral party. But no, the gods opted for total war, a bloody conflict that serves only to highlight their own terrible judgment and penchant for needless violence. The cost, both in human lives and resources, was staggering, and yet the outcome was hardly satisfying. It was a lesson in how not to handle international disputes, or perhaps a very dramatic soap opera played out on a grand scale. The sheer lack of consistency in divine justice is also astounding. One god might mete out a mild punishment for a serious offense, while another would unleash a plague for something relatively trivial. It was a system governed by whim rather than any established legal framework. There was no codified law, no established legal precedent, and no semblance of fairness. It was divine chaos, pure and simple. Imagine the legal scholars trying to reconcile that mess. They'd have more to unravel than the Gordian knot. Furthermore, the Olympians' penchant for meddling in human affairs often resulted in unintended consequences, far more severe than any initial offense. Their actions resembled less a system of justice and more a cosmic game of dominoes, where one ill considered decision could trigger a chain reaction of disastrous events. It was less a court of law and more a cosmic comedy of errors, though one with tragically high human costs. And let's not forget the issue of witness testimony. The Olympians had an infuriating habit of changing their stories, depending on their mood or who they happened to be talking to. Imagine trying to build a case with such unreliable witnesses. Their perception of events, their memories, their very interpretations of the truth were subject to the whims of their own temperaments. It was judicial pandemonium. But perhaps the most absurd aspect of divine justice was the utter lack of appeal. Once a god had passed judgment, that was it. There was no court of appeal, no higher authority to whom one could turn. You were stuck with your fate, however unjust or nonsensical it may have been. Even the mightiest of heroes, the cleverest of mortals, were powerless against the whims of the gods. It was a system designed not for fairness, but for absolute power. It's an absolute lack of checks and balances. One can only imagine the complaints filed in the celestial mailbox, ignored for millennia. Think of the poor mortals, caught in the crossfire of divine squabbles, subjected to punishments that had no relation to their actual crimes. They were pawns in a cosmic game, their lives dictated by beings whose motives were often as opaque as their judgments were arbitrary. It's a scenario that brings both frustration and dark humor to mind. The entire system screams of inefficiency, inconsistency, and a complete disregard for basic legal principles. One can't help but feel a certain level of schadenfreude for the mortals who had to endure this absurd, chaotic mess. In fact, it makes our own legal systems, with all their flaws and inefficiencies, look almost reasonable in comparison. At least we have the semblance of due process, a constitution, even if it is occasionally flouted. It is a compelling argument for a better legal system. The Olympian model clearly requires some reform. Perhaps a divinely appointed committee of wise owls, or a panel of impartial satyrs. A standardized code of conduct might be a good start, and most of all, maybe a strict limitation on the use of thunderbolts in judicial proceedings. After all, one cannot run a fair court if the judge is throwing lightning bolts. The whole affair provides a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of fair and impartial justice. And of course, it's a reminder that even the gods are not above making a terrible mess of things. Maybe, just maybe, they need a little more training in judicial ethics, perhaps a mandatory workshop on impartiality and the proper use of divine weapons, or perhaps even a simple course in basic legal principles for overly powerful beings. The sheer absurdity of the situation is almost laughable were it not for the human suffering caused by such utter disregard for justice. So, there you have it, a whirlwind tour through the chaotic, inconsistent, and often hilariously inept legal system of Olympus. We've witnessed divine injustices, petty squabbles disguised as cosmic dramas, and punishments that would make a seasoned torturer blush. The whole affair, frankly, is a masterclass in how not to run a legal system. But even amidst the thunderbolts and the treachery, a deeper truth emerges, a truth that resonates far beyond the mythical realm and into our own very human experiences. The enduring appeal of these ancient myths, after all, lies not in their historical accuracy, Let's be honest, Zeus wasn't exactly known for his meticulous record keeping, but in their timeless reflection of the human condition. These stories, filled with absurd situations and larger than life characters, force us to confront the often absurd reality of our own lives. They remind us that life isn't always fair, that justice isn't always swift, and that even the most powerful beings are capable of making monumental blunders. Think about it. How often do we find ourselves grappling with situations that seem utterly ridiculous, utterly unfair? The bureaucratic nightmare of filling out endless forms, the infuriatingly slow pace of progress on a project, the constant barrage of emails that demand attention even on vacation days. These modern day Sisyphean tasks are surprisingly common. And how many of us have felt the sting of arbitrary injustice, of having rules applied differently depending on who you happen to be? The Olympian pantheon, with its flawed and often capricious governance, becomes a surprisingly accurate metaphor for the frustrating, perplexing, and occasionally hilarious absurdities of human existence. The laughter we derive from these myths isn't simply a reaction to the comical nature of the gods' antics. It's a coping mechanism, a way to confront the inherent absurdity of life. Humor, as the ancients knew, is a powerful tool. It allows us to distance ourselves from pain, to examine our experiences with a touch of ironic detachment, and even to find a measure of peace in the midst of chaos. The seemingly endless struggle of Sisyphus, for example, becomes less tragic and more darkly comedic when we see it as a representation of our own struggles, of the endless grind of everyday life. It allows us to acknowledge that we are all, in a sense, pushing boulders uphill, that our efforts are not always rewarded, and that sometimes the most we can hope for is a good laugh in the face of it all. Furthermore, the Greek myths, in their gloriously chaotic portrayal of the divine, encourage us to embrace the unexpected. Life, as we know, is full of surprises, many of which are far from pleasant. But the stories of the gods remind us that even within apparent chaos, there is often a pattern, a hidden logic that shapes events, even if we don't fully understand it. The Trojan War, triggered by a stolen apple, may seem initially absurd, but it highlights the unintended consequences of actions, demonstrating how a single, seemingly small event can trigger catastrophic changes. This isn't just a mythological lesson, it's a reflection of the butterfly effect we see played out daily in our own lives, emphasizing the interconnectedness of seemingly disparate events. The enduring power of these stories, then, is their capacity to offer both perspective and comfort. They remind us that we're not alone in our struggles, that even gods with all their power are prone to mistakes, and that sometimes the best we can do is to laugh, to accept the absurdity of it all, and to continue pushing our boulders uphill, armed with a sense of humor and a slightly more cynical outlook on divine intervention. This is not an endorsement of apathy, of course. It's a call to embrace the full spectrum of human experience, to acknowledge the inevitable imperfections of systems and individuals, and to find solace in the shared absurdity of our collective journey. The seemingly arbitrary nature of divine justice in Greek mythology, a system where the punishments rarely fit the crimes and where consistency was utterly absent, serves as a cautionary tale. It's a potent reminder that human created systems, no matter how well intentioned, are also flawed, capable of injustice, and susceptible to arbitrary decisions. However, while the Olympian system lacks transparency, accountability, and even a shred of procedural fairness, our own legal systems, while far superior, are still subject to imperfections. The struggles for justice, for equality, for a truly just and impartial system are ongoing, even in modern societies. The myths, in their exaggerated depiction of these shortcomings, provoke reflection. They prompt us to examine our own systems of justice, to question their efficacy, and to strive for continual improvement. The stories are not merely entertaining tales, they are critical examinations of power, authority, and the human search for a just and equitable world. They highlight the dangers of unchecked power, the importance of due process, and the inherent risks of arbitrary rule, whether wielded by a god on Mount Olympus or a bureaucrat in a modern day office. The stories don't offer easy answers or neat resolutions. They leave us with the complexity of the human condition, with the persistent tension between justice and injustice, fairness and unfairness. But they offer something arguably more valuable: the opportunity for self reflection, for a deeper understanding of our own fallibilities, and the enduring need for the relentless pursuit of a better world. And what of the sheer comedic absurdity? The gods, in all their powerful immaturity, are truly a source of endless amusement. Their petty jealousies, their impulsive actions, their utter disregard for the consequences of their deeds, these are not only humorous, but also a profound commentary on the human capacity for error. By placing these foibles on a divine scale, the myths magnify our own flaws, forcing us to confront them with a mixture of laughter and self awareness. Moreover, the enduring presence of these stories in our collective consciousness speaks volumes about their enduring relevance. They haven't faded into obscurity. They remain vibrant, reinterpreted, and reimagined through generations. This speaks to the timeless nature of the human struggle, the universal experiences of injustice, the pervasive presence of absurdity, and the constant need for humor as a coping mechanism. In conclusion, the exploration of moral quandaries and existential dread in Greek mythology is not simply an academic exercise. It's a profoundly human experience. The stories offer a darkly comic mirror to our own lives, reminding us of the absurdity, the injustice, and the unexpected turns that shape our journeys. They encourage laughter in the face of adversity, perspective in times of trial, and the continuous pursuit of a more just and equitable world. Perhaps, then, the greatest lesson learned from the Olympians isn't a specific moral code, but rather a deeper understanding of the inherent imperfections of both the divine and the human, and the essential role of humor and perspective in navigating the complex tapestry of existence. After all, even the gods, in their infinite wisdom, or lack thereof, couldn't quite get it right, and neither will we, but the attempt at least makes for a good story.